What's a lesson from judging hundreds of pitches that applies equally to life outside of startups and VC?
I would say learning how to make really quick decisions and understanding going with your gut. And so I think this is an important life lesson because it's helping judge people's character. And I think it's an important lesson for like aspiring investors as well as like when I think about one day whenever I have kids, it's like, what do I want to teach them? It's knowing what is your first impression of someone. And so I think when you're pitching, you really have to learn how can you communicate something clearly? Can you get people to like you? And in the real world, when you're doing business or you're interacting with people, maybe regardless of profession, you really have to know how to convince people to trust you, right? Like for example, let's think of a doctor. You know, you're treating a patient and they're telling you their medical history. You have to get them to trust you. And so that's kind of the case when you're giving a pitch. It's you're pitching yourself and your trust and your credibility. And if a founder can do that well, let's say you've got like 1 minute to pitch who you are and what you're doing, and you can get that trust, that skill set can be very valuable in other areas of your life.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today we're thrilled to have Sarah Romanko on the mic. She is on the investment team at Geek Ventures, where she focuses on sourcing and evaluating early stage startups led by visionary immigrant founders. We've done a lot of deals with Geek over the years, and so excited to have her. She has hands-on experience across multiple VC firms, so we'll talk about that. Startup ecosystems from Hustle Fund to Sputnik, Techstars. Thanks for coming on, Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here, Brian. As Brian said, I'm on the investment team here at Geek Ventures. I focus on sourcing, evaluating, and diligencing prospective investment opportunities. What I really love is also working with our founders post-investment. And there's a few founders that we're currently in the process of working with. Haven't announced the investments yet, but super excited. Hopefully we'll announce that in a few weeks.
Well, I'd love to get your origin story. What's your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up very different from my peers. I was that child that loved to do homework, which I think is very weird. I remember when I was in kindergarten, I did my homework twice just for fun. And I was kind of like that growing up. When I was in high school, I grew up watching Shark Tank. I remember I had the opportunity to participate in more than 10 business classes. So I did business competitions and I was going to networking events when I was like 14, 15 years old. And I think that really early experience charted the path for me because I just knew that I was, always wanted to be that hard worker and not go to parties like my friends. I always had my nose in a book or studying. So when I got to university, I really wanted to dive deep into business. So I took several business classes, kind of just like when I was in high school. I already had a great business background because of high school. And I had some early VC roles, but they weren't really, didn't lead to a full-time role. It was more just kind of like getting that early experience. Did some roles at my university, also did like fellowships, worked for some startups. And that's where I'll pause because I can go deeper.
Yeah, I'd love to kind of get that story arc from university to having a full-time role in venture. I'm sure a lot of younger folks out there listening to this podcast want to break into venture, and it's hard to do. So maybe you could kind of talk about that journey because it's not easy.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I thought I had it all figured out. I had that path, like I mentioned in high school. I did business classes, competitions, majored in general business. I had great GPA. I did the honors programs. I thought I was following the path that everyone tells you to follow growing up, But for me, the biggest challenge was when I graduated, I was told that I didn't have enough experience. So for me, the roles I was applying for, they were looking for people who already had several internships under their belt, and for me, the biggest challenge was that they also required someone to relocate. My personal life is very important to me. So I recently got engaged and I didn't want to move because my fiance and I had already done long distance. So for me, I say that because I think that there's so much focus on in the venture world of really focusing on, the like work all the time, 24/7, but there is that personal side that really helps you have that success. And so I was trying to prioritize both. And so there weren't many roles in Austin and in Dallas, which is where I wanted to stay. And that's ultimately why it was so hard for me to get a role. And what I did was I took several different like fellowship roles, internship roles, Sputnik ATX VC here in Austin, Moonshots Capital. I was on the advisory board at Able Partners. I did Venture Institute put on by VC Lab.
Is the Moonshots Capital to say, is that Peter Diamandis or is it a different?
Different one. Moonshots Capital, it's like they invest in a lot of like defense tech companies.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And also companies founded by veterans. Great team. Love them. And I also, had the opportunity to I was kind of doing some speaking events around this time, but it wasn't enough to fully break in. So I took a full-time job in real estate because, as any good entrepreneur knows, you have to find a way to make ends meet while you're pursuing your goal. I let my career build up while I was going to events. I was doing a lot of outreach on LinkedIn. And then one day I said, this was really funny. I said, once I hit 4,000 connections, I'm leaving my job. Like, true story. And I remember
Why 4,000? What was that number?
I don't know. It was super random. I just, in this number, thought it was this magic number that said, this is the key to success. I don't know why, but it was like that weird calling. You ever get that calling, that gut feeling like this is the right time? And that's when I left my role. That was I believe in 2023, kind of over the summer. And at that point, I moved back home. I gave up a stable job. I had no job prospects. People think I was crazy for doing this. I literally had no prospects. I just started applying to jobs, hope for the best, did whatever I possibly could because I knew there was no backup plan. If I didn't get a job, I'd have to live with my parents, and I hated that. And then I got a full-time VC role in the spring of that year, or of the following year. It didn't work out. The firm didn't raise when they were expecting to raise, which unfortunately happens sometimes. And then I found Geek Ventures and I applied, and I had several warm introductions, and that helped. But I also created a 32-slide presentation, so that also definitely helped me.
Is that something EHAR wanted you to do, or you just said,
No.
"Hey, here's the presentation"?
It's something I wanted to do. So I was actually inspired by Nicole de Tomaso. I hope I pronounced her name right, but she's been such an inspiration. I saw her post on LinkedIn and I saw that she did this like presentation, like 10 slides to help her land her full-time role. And I said, why not do something similar? I went a bit overboard though, because 32 slides is a lot, but I felt like it was very helpful in just explaining like deals. So I said deals that I would recommend, deals I hated in Geek Ventures. I think the team liked this. I actually ripped apart several of their portfolio companies. I said, These are terrible investments and here's why. And I was very proud of that. Also investments that were really
VCs
good.
love that, actually. We love like good VCs anyway. Love kind of thinking about, it's almost like thinking about how you make decisions, right? Like sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you make a call to invest and it's the right call. And you want to understand why you made the right call. But sometimes it's a 2x2 matrix, right? Right call worked out. Right call didn't work out. Wrong call worked out. Wrong call didn't work out, right? So like we're always kind of like analyzing in that 2x2 our decision-making process, and the good ones anyway.
Exactly. And I love to question. I love to ask them why. I said, like, why did you make this decision? I don't agree with it. And I think that really helped. And they also just diving deeper into what set me apart. I said, like for aspiring VCs out there, I was very prepared. I said, day one, if you hire me, this is exactly what I'm going to do. And this is why I will be the best hire. And all those things I said I would do, I actually did. I said, here's how I'm going to source deals. Here's how I'm going to increase the Geek Ventures brand. Here's how I'm going to help founders. And here's how, what about me is very unique. So my LinkedIn following, like I'm now at 22,000 followers. When I joined, I think it was at 9 or 10,000. And I really explained how I was going to use my network, got some really unique opportunities to speak, in terms of just getting myself invited to events. There's some events that have yet to be announced that I've been able to use my network to even get me into that I otherwise wouldn't have access to. So I think those are just some of the ways. And it's really about figuring what was my moat. I want to think like a founder. Like, what about me? I'm young, no tech background, no Ivy League degree. Why, out of everyone else, why would I be a good fit? And so I think for me, explaining that and just doubling down on my beliefs, that was so important. And they even, one great thing they did during the interview is I think they tried to like question why I believe something. And I stayed true to my beliefs because that's so important as a VC, is when someone disagrees, you can't just change your mind on the
fly. Yeah. And there's 1,000 ways to do venture, and most of them are wrong, or maybe they're all have shreds of truth.
I might.
Yeah, you seem like very ambitious and motivated. Where do you think that comes from?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something I've asked myself. So for me, I've always been very stubborn. Like the most stubborn person to ever exist. I think I was actually born stubborn because I remember when I was little, my parents were very ambitious parents. So I'm an only child, and they forced me to do everything. I was taking languages. When I was little, I was learning German and Chinese. I don't speak either of those now. I hated German, loved Chinese. No Chinese heritage, 25% German. So my mom got really offended when I didn't want to learn it. I was also learning Spanish. I stopped learning that in college. I did all the clubs. I did sports. I did music. But what I really hated was trying to do music for some reason because my parents forced me to do it. They never forced education on me, not once. I love that on my own. They just encouraged me to learn. There's just this feeling of I genuinely loved it. And I think it was something I was born with. I can't explain why. And it's even something like I've talked at length about with other people and said, like, why are you wired this way? Because I think for me, it was also an outlet because like I was always very different than my peers growing up. I also had a lot of health challenges, a lot of injuries, like just chronic ankle issues from playing sports. And so for me, school was always a way that I could just relax and have fun and do something that, maybe when I wasn't feeling well, school was always there for me. So I think it was the fact that I loved to learn, but it was also a sense of comfort. And that together just created this motivation of, hey, there's a way that I can be seen, I can be heard, and I won't be seen as different from everybody else. Because I did see that. I would often be on the sidelines, literally, just while my peers were out doing other things, and I would just be at home studying. So I think that was kind of what that motivation, that ambition, and that really set the path for me. And that's also why I chose Geek Ventures, is those that are different than everybody else and don't have the same story.
Yeah, I love that. So what first drew you into VC or venture capital generally? Was there an aha moment? Was it like watching Shark Tank back in the day? Like, what was it where you're like, that's what I want to do?
Yeah, I think for me, it was the fact that these founders gave up everything and they really were staying true to their dreams. I wanted to support somebody, like I wanted to support people who were not supported by those in their community when they were like initially starting out. So what I mean by that is, like, when I was starting out in venture, when I was growing up, I had a lot of people who didn't believe me, people who were like, this isn't going to be possible. I was actually once told that I would not succeed in college because I didn't have a high enough IQ and because of all my health issues. And, just that was something that was very hard for me to hear. But I said, I may just have to work harder than everybody else, but I'm okay with that. And so I think, like, knowing that, in venture capital, you have people who are like the dreamers, the crazy, like, I think there's this quote from Steve Jobs where it's like, people may not think it's possible, but it is. And so I wanted to be the early believers. And that's also why I chose like pre-seed and seed, because I want to be there with people day one, like from the very beginning, who, like, I just can see the vision. And so, like, that's kind of the way I see it, is like I spot that talent early on. And it's not just startups. Like, I've even referred people to VC programs who went on to land some great VC roles. And so it's like, I like to say that I'm kind of that like sorcerer, or the sorceress. So not just for startups, but for talent. So I think that's why I chose venture. It was also just the fact that I felt like I could be, I'm not saying understood by everybody, but the people that did understood me really well. So it's like, you can't please everyone and not everyone's going to like you. And that's totally fine. Like, there are people that are going to disagree with what you do. And I've had that and I'm used to that. But it's the people that really, that small community of people that say, hey, you're doing something really good and we want to back you. That's kind of that like inspiration and my overall vision for venture.
Yeah, I love that. So there's lots of aspiring investors out there struggling to get that first break. You told us a little bit about how you broke in, but kind of generally, what's your advice for young people in their 20s trying to break into VC? Should they even try to break into VC? Should they go be a founder first? Or, like, you've probably talked to lots of young people like that coming out of college. Like, what's your general advice in that area?
Yeah, so this is one that when I first started out in venture, I first thought that, oh, like, I want to get a job immediately after college and go right into venture. And I also saw a lot of posts from people on LinkedIn saying like whether it was good or whether it was bad. Now that I've been in the industry for some time, like, what my advice is, just from my experience, I personally think it was really valuable, the path that I took. So working at several startups, working directly with founders, having had corporate experience, I worked in real estate, understanding what a corporate job looks like before landing my dream role. Because I think if I hadn't had that, I'm not saying it would have been impossible, because obviously, like, everyone has different backgrounds. But because I had that like startup and VC experience and corporate experience before going this role, and I already built a network, that made me so much more successful. So like, what I would say is, like, if someone's like started a company in college, or they've had VC roles in college, or they've had startup experience, going right into venture after college is like a no-brainer. Like, that makes a ton of sense. But I think, like, if you're saying you want to go into venture without like any prior background or any like understanding at all, I think that would be a bit harder. And I, of course, like, if people, this is one thing I love, is I love when people debate me on this, because I have so many opinions on this. And so it's like, my specific view is like, I think you need some type of startup experience. However, there are cases where people may not need that because they understand the market so well. But I think, like, for me, generally speaking, I'd recommend working at a startup or a VC in some capacity first, whether that's after college or during college.
Yeah, that's generally the advice I give too. I've had a lot of MBA interns come through that actually have work experience, and undergrads too. And I'll tell them, like, to be a really good VC, I think you need the empathy of the
Yes.
founder and the operators that are operating that startup. And if you have no operational experience, then you just don't know what it's like day to day in the trenches, like failing and trying to get a product shipped and trying to sell it and trying to market it. And you just don't have the empathy. So I would agree. I think you need to get some operational experience. I don't know how much is right, but at least one, multi-year kind of role, just to have some, and better yet, try to found a company, right?
Yes.
I think that's even better. Empathy. So tell us about Geek Ventures. What's the thesis? What made it stand out for you?
Yeah, so Geek Ventures, we invest in immigrant founders to the US. So we define that as founders that were born outside of the US and moved to the US. We are focusing on AI and robotics. Specifically within AI, we're saying companies that are, doing are basically doing AI broadly. So it could be like a vertical AI, horizontal AI, but really there needs to be a really strong technical moat, technical differentiation, et cetera. And we write 100 to 700K checks. We typically do like one new investment per month. And for us, we want founders that have really strong like domain expertise, are passionate about what they're building. They know how to sell. That's a really big one for us. So knowing how to sell to investors, knowing how to sell to customers. And we, love founders that know how to take feedback because, for me, like there's a founder, like we haven't announced the investment yet. By the time this podcast is released, it might be announced. We'll see. But I've gotten to work closely with
We're
them.
probably 2 or 3 weeks out, just so you know.
Okay.
So
it,
yeah.
it might be released by that time. And of course, I'll comment on who that founder was later, but really loved getting to work with them. They've been really receptive to the feedback in the sense that I've said, I think you should do this in terms of your product development, in terms of your fundraise, but they're also not blindly agreeing. That's also really important. I don't want a founder that's just going to blindly agree. I want them to kind of push me a little bit, like that kind of good rapport. I built a great relation with them over quite a long period of time. And I think that really helped. And that's kind of, I think, what's important to us.
So you've reviewed hundreds, if not thousands of decks now.
Yes.
What do you wish you knew then when you got started that you know now?
Yeah, I think what I wish I knew now, are you saying in terms of like the evaluation process, in terms of time spent? Like I can go very in depth here.
All of it, yeah.
All of it. I think what I wish I knew when I first started was time management in terms of not only my specific responsibilities and the fact that I'm not only doing sourcing, meeting with founders, closing deals, had the opportunity to work to close several deals, which has been really, really exciting and fulfilling for me. But I think also just understanding like when to prioritize a deal versus when to kind of say, okay, I'm going to go work on something else, because I've closed some great deals, but I also had an experience of losing some deals because of not spending enough time when earlier on. So I think like for me, what I really wish, and this is something I wish I would know, like maybe even to aspiring VCs, is like when you're getting into the industry, really talk with investors to understand like what makes a deal exciting, what makes a deal fast moving. What are those signals that says this deal is going to close really fast? Because there's this one deal that we lost. I remember when I first started, and we didn't get excited until it was too late. And the founder kind of knew that. We were pretty far along, and then they already had, like, they got oversubscribed, and it was really hard for us because I was really excited about this deal. Like
we all have those, you move too slow, you don't prioritize the deal. I actually have a label in my Gmail now called fast. And it's like, that's the one I go look at every day. I'm like, am I pushing this deal forward? Because I feel like if I don't, the round's going to close, it's 75, 85% committed. It's a really amazing team. I better move fast. We've all had that situation, right? Where the round gets oversubscribed and they're like, sorry. And you're like, but, and you're like, sorry, next round,
Definitely.
Yeah.
Or times where it's like we invest in a founder and it's also and they end up doing really well, but we missed out and we try to get in later. So I think another thing is learning how to learn from deals that you've missed out on, but not dwell on them too much. I think that's a really important lesson because it can be really easy to get caught up in on LinkedIn. Like, and there's this case right now, there's some companies where we're monitoring, we're like, man, we really missed out. But at the same time, moving forward and working on new exciting deals. And
yeah.
So I think
wrong call worked out. It's actually more painful, right? That's the one for me where I'm like, ooh, I need to really evaluate why I said no to this deal that worked out, right? That's now like a multi-$100 million company.
Yes.
So those are the most painful.
Or what about like saying yes, but it shouldn't have worked? Like it was like those cases where it's like you said yes, it was really technically on paper a bad investment, but then it had a great return. Like how do you learn from those?
Yeah. And I'd love to learn how you do it at Geek. What I try to do, if I can, is I try to get the founder on the call after they shut down or, they give up or whatever. And I try to get a postmortem going where I'm like, hey, let's be fellow VCs here for a second. Like, what did we miss? Because we both put money and time on the line here that we lost. So let's try to talk about it. And to their credit, most founders will get on that call. I've only had maybe a couple over the years that won't do that call, but I think it can like be illuminating for both the founder and the VC in that situation. A lot of them don't want to do that, but it's like you kind of want to hide from your failure. But I tell them, hey, no, I want to learn. Like, I think you're a great founder and let's try to learn together and do better in the future.
Definitely. And then we take those learnings for future investments because I've noticed that there is one company that we invested in that is not doing well. I saw a similar company kind of operating in an adjacent market And I told our team, I said, hey, I'm really excited about this. And they said, well, these reasons you may be excited, but this investment kind of failed before I joined and I wasn't as aware. And so then they're like, hey, maybe be a little more critical because of this. And so that kind of helps me understand more when I'm looking at opportunities. And so I think another thing for aspiring investors to know is when you're looking at opportunities, evaluate the existing portfolio and really spend time asking questions about why a company is performing well or performing badly, because that can actually help influence why your firm may or may not do an investment. It may have nothing to do with the actual investment. It could just be that I forgot the word for it, but it's like that, those battle scars, I think is what it is.
So post investment, how do you guys like to help founders beyond capital? What kind of support do you guys do?
Yeah, so I love this. This is one of my favorite parts. So I think, one thing I'll start with is the fact that we host a lot of events. So we have events that we've hosted. I hosted an event during South by Southwest here in Austin. We've done events in San Francisco. We've done events a lot. Actually, recently did an event in Lisbon during Web Summit. I wasn't there this year. Our team was. I was there last year. We've done events in New York. We've done events in Zurich, and we bring together founders from our portfolio, LPs, some are invite only, some are curated. That's been really helpful for our founders in terms of helping them just get access to people they otherwise wouldn't be able to talk to in terms of like people that are high profile. We do online events with our LPs. So our founders actually have the chance to present to our LPs, which is valuable and get feedback. We bring in experts, GTM, hiring, etc. We have a CEO community only for our founders. That's really helpful because, we have founders that need help with specific things that only other founders will be able to help them with. Like we like to acknowledge when we don't know the answer to something. And that's, I think, the mark of also a great VC. So our founders can ask each other for help there. We help with fundraising. Of course, that's a really big one. We have several hundred investors, combined, and we've been able to make introductions to help them, complete their raises. We do an investor newsletter. I started this in January. So it goes out to the investors in our network and it's able to stay updated on, how our portfolio is doing, hiring. We can basically introduce them to potential customers. We have a recruiting agency that we work with. But I think the most important thing that I like to highlight, of course, there's a lot of ways that VCs can help and there's many more we help, but we have that empathy for founders. And I like to say it's because we're nerds at heart. I had the opportunity to
geeks. You guys are geeks at heart.
Essentially. Like I had the opportunity to go up to New York and spend some time, with Ihar in person, our managing partner, and get to spend some time learning more about like what he's passionate about outside of work. And I think that was so helpful because for us, it's like we do a lot of team building activities for our team, even as a remote culture, right? And so I think that's so valuable. And like that translates to our founders. Like I talk about my hobbies. I love D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. Like I love arcades.
Nice.
And we find ways to incorporate that. So I tell the founders, and that's like, they love that. Their eyes light up when I say, hey, like I want to nerd out with you about this. Like I may be a business person by nature, but hey, I'm willing to learn. Like if you want to practice telling me technical like stuff, like I'm all for it. Like I think it's really fun.
What's your favorite video game?
Yeah, favorite video game. Actually, funny thing, I played Halo it was either Halo or Call of Duty when I was a kid, which is really funny because I don't know why I was playing that in 3rd or 4th grade. Probably not the smartest idea. But I also really like, in terms of like more actual games, I like pinball, like physical. I love going to arcades, playing pinball, and crane games. Crane games are my thing.
Yeah, I keep all my gaming stuff in the background. So founders who are in the know, they're like, oh, I see all your gaming stuff there. I'm like, yeah, I'm a gamer. I still game.
Awesome. I should do that.
Yeah, it's fun. Like I still game. Like I gamed last night. The new Escape from Tarkov just came out, which is like this simulation shooter extraction from Russia of all places. So it's a really tough game. Anyway, so you've judged everything from high school DECA contests to startup grinds and different pitch battles. What makes a great pitch stand out to you immediately?
Yeah, so for me, and this is actually interesting because I've actually seen some high school students pitch better than founders that are, full time. And I think what really stands out is taking the seriousness out of it. And this is why I love judging high schoolers and also, judging like founders that are doing this, like I said, like full time, is because it's the ones that know how to have fun and can explain what they're doing in one sentence. And this is like kind of when you think of the YC founders, like if I say, like, can you sell me this pen and why is this important? It goes back to that. Like I remember when I was doing these high school DECA competitions, I'm doing another one in December. I'm so excited, actually. I just signed up about an hour ago. Is they know their numbers, they know their research. In 1 minute, I can walk away and just tell all my friends what they're doing. And it's like they tell me in layman's terms. And so I think this is a great lesson for founders. Like, if you can pitch your company to, an everyday person, like pretending you're pitching maybe to like your 5-year-old, daughter or son, right? Like that's what makes a really good pitch, I think, is if I have a really clear takeaway and it's like, it's also memorable because
Yeah.
I go through, like you said, hundreds, if not thousands of decks. Like, am I going to remember after, a really long work day, late nights, catching up on work? Like, will I remember your company? Is it going to stand out? I had a founder like that we're in talks with right now. It was just one of the best pitches. Like, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was that good. Like, I literally felt like if I had my own money, I would write them a check right now. Like, that's what I want to pitch to them.
Yeah. That's a good heuristic, right? Is like, would I put my own money in this? Would I want to work for this person? What are some characteristics or things that you guys look at where like you're leaning in, this is definitely an easy yes for us, or this is like a hard pass, like this is definitely an easy no for us?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with the hard no first, or sorry, the easy no first. Is like, I think for us, we've seen like if there's really challenges with the company structure in terms of like, let's say there's like there's too many pivots, there's like complex structures in terms of like how they're spinning the company out. This could be really, I just speak from personal experience. Every situation is unique. I think other things is where if the founder is not being transparent with us, that is the number one. I mean, we can get over some of those other things I mentioned if we're understanding why there's certain like ownership structures or whatever. If you're gonna lie to me, if you're gonna tell me you have this revenue when you don't, if you're gonna pretend that your net revenue or GMV is net revenue, that's a big frustration I have. That's gonna be an automatic no from us, or just lying to us and just trying to pit investors.
Or they're about to sign the contract. I'm like, great, can you send over the red line?
Exactly.
Oh, well, we don't have a red line yet. Okay, can you send me over the draft contract that they have in their hands? Oh, well, we haven't sent the draft. Like, so how are they about to sign the signed contract? Like this huge contract, like stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's
and there's hundreds of these like little things that we pick up on, as we kind of dig in. And what are you excited about in the coming year or two, and even longer term, like 5 or 10 years out?
Yeah. So are you saying in terms of like industry or like specific role, like
however you want to take that question?
Yeah. So I think for me, what I'm really excited about is how the market is shifting in terms of how we're making investment decisions and who we're investing in. So what I mean is looking at it from the top down. So looking at LPs and how they're actually distributing their funds into VCs. So if we just say LPs distributing, more LPs, I believe, are distributing into emerging managers because they're starting to see that the typical like venture playbook is not like it was 20 years ago, in the sense that great, and this goes back to Geek Ventures thesis that opportunity is not equally distributed, right? But talent is everywhere, something like that. But essentially it's like, great founders can come from anywhere. And emerging VCs have really unique ways to access this talent based on those unique experiences. So like in my specific case, I've built certain founder networks because I'm based here in Austin, because of the connections I built over the years, because I'm Gen Z. I can access these younger founders that may be harder for the more established VCs to access based on like how they built those networks over time. And so like this is what LPs are seeing in terms of the emerging managers they're backing. That's why we're seeing a lot of emerging managers that are actually in their 20s, which I think is a really interesting dynamic because 20 years ago, you wouldn't see that. In terms of founders, we're also starting to see more younger founders. Now, what I will say though, is to be very careful of the hype. And one of my connections, her name is Zap. She made a really great LinkedIn post about this recently. Is she said that all those young founders out there, be very careful of just hyping everything up with AI and just using those words like, oh, we're vibe coding, we're getting this early revenue. Like, don't let that, don't let all of that influence you to make the wrong decisions or just focus on all this publicity. Like, actually build something useful. It's great if you're young, but don't just get caught up in that hype. So I think like doing things for the right reasons, and you can be successful if you have this different background, but don't like try to overuse it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you could redesign a VC from scratch, what would you change?
Yeah, I think for me, I would try to eliminate bias. When I was in university, I did a report on how, I did a honors capstone on how investors are allocating capital and why they make certain investment decisions. And historically, it was based on founders that had similar backgrounds, similar characteristics, certain universities. And nowadays, like what I'm so proud to say is when I look at our past investments, I can't tell you what universities they went to. And that's a great thing. Instead, I can tell you their background, and I can tell you, of course, we know if I look in the history, but it's, what was their story? What was like, why did they start this? And so I think it's really investing more based on the person as opposed to the idea. And it's kind of like, would you bet on the jockey or bet on the horse, right? And I think like every VC has the reasons. For me, because I've seen so many pivots, I am more wanting to back a really good founder with, maybe the idea isn't as good, but if there's a really good founder, like I am totally willing to double down on it, which everyone may not agree with, may say, well, you need a really good idea, but like if it's a great founder that has past success, they can just pivot. So it's almost like if you see on Shark Tank, which is not realistic of VC by any means, but it's great learning for those starting out. Sometimes these sharks will say, hey, I want to back this founder. I don't like what they're building, but I want to back you for who you are. And so that's kind of like what I would want to do. But at the same time, I would also say, hey, like, don't just back someone like without doing your diligence, because I think nowadays sometimes, and I think every VC is guilty of this, we get really excited and we back a founder without doing our proper diligence, and then we see what happens when we mess up, to put it nicely. But I think, not just saying, hey, like I'm going to immediately write a check without doing the proper diligence, because it goes back to the hype, right? So I think it's balancing the hype versus the reality, but knowing what the difference is and knowing when someone is actually telling the truth versus just selling you. And that's a skill that's really hard to develop that I'm personally still working on.
Do you guys ever forego the due diligence process when it's like the timing? It's like it's an easy yes, and it's like there's a really strong lead, and you got to make a decision by tomorrow.
Yes.
Is it? Yeah.
Yes, and that's the hard balance, and that's why I say that it's contradicting when I say that, because I know a deal I worked on, we moved really quickly. We did diligence, but it was more, it was a lot faster diligence. And this is hard because I think if you don't have as much time to build the relationship with the founder, it's a lot harder to see how they react in certain situations. Because this one company I mentioned earlier, who I'm working closely with this founder, I've gotten to know them over a long period of time, and I've seen how they react. And that's why I felt so comfortable really telling the team, like, hey, we need to back this deal. And we passed on them at first, we monitored them for a while, and then we invested. And I remember from the first time I met them, and this was in person, usually we do our meetings online, this happened to be in person, I was just like, there's something about this company. And I just really felt that like vibe with the founder, which is such a Gen Z thing to say, but I think more people will be saying it in the future.
So you guys are an online first VC firm, and I feel like a lot of VC firms are now. Like, how do you guys, what are some best practices, and like, what do you guys do internally to try to stay connected and kind of balance that remote work?
Really great team culture. From the moment I joined, I felt like they knew everything there was about me. We've done so many team building activities, like some fun ones like Two Truths and a Lie. We've done this thing called like scribble.io, I think it's called, or it's kind of like online Pictionary. I think, a lot of people may say, oh, that's silly. Like, why spend all this time on all this team building? But it really plays deeper into thinking about VC as a team sport, because when you think about it, we're in really stressful environments. We're dealing with founders who have put everything at stake. And, you need a team that is mentally well and is able to have hard conversations with each other when they disagree on certain investment decisions. And so when you have a team that genuinely cares for each other and knows that if anyone disagrees or says anything, it's never personal. It's only just because it's for the good of the business. Once you have that great foundation, I think that's why our culture is so strong and why I love it so much, because like the team knows so many things about me. Like, we did a team building activity when we were in San Francisco during Tech Week. We went to an old, like an antique museum arcade, and they know I love arcades. And it was just a great way to get to know the team better and just take a break from work and things like that. It's like when the team really takes that time to care for you, it feeds into the founders that you work with, and that feeds into their culture. So that, I think, is one of the most important things that's not widely talked about, especially in VC.
So looking forward, what do you hope to be known for, 5 or 10 years from now?
I've thought a lot about this, and the funny thing is this has been asked in even some of the applications when I've applied for various roles or scholarships. I think for me, the most important thing is that I've made a positive impact on the founders and the VCs I've worked with. And what does that actually mean? So, I think for the longest time, I was like, oh, I want to invest in this number of deals, or I want to have this X return, which I think is great. Like, of course I want that. And what does that look like? To be determined, right? Because I think I'm very early in what return am I actually looking for, right? Based on the dynamics of our fund. But I think like that will happen if I look at the bigger picture, which is my goal really is to think, okay, how many startups have I been able to, help, whether that's us actually investing, referring to other investors, but to where they're actually companies that are making a difference in the world and actually are doing something that's for the good of the world. And I'm not saying like, we're not like by definition impact investor, but it's a company that like, maybe it's improving productivity, or it's some, mental health platform that's making people's lives better. And then on the flip side with investors, it's thinking about the investors that I've referred to programs that's helping them land jobs, that's ultimately helping them invest in companies that go with their personal mission. And so I think like that's how I really track the success and what I want to be remembered for. And I think like that's something, I applied for VC University, and I'm in their like mentorship program right now. I got like a full scholarship, and that's something I shared because that's what their mission is. And I share this because this is a great program for aspiring VCs who really want to get a leg up, because you're actually paired with two VCs who are in the industry and can give you advice. And you're also doing a formal program along with mentorship, office hours, and all this other stuff, right? And so like I think that's really what's important to me, is making that positive difference, and not just saying, oh, I only want to get this extra return. Because if you focus on the paying it forward first, then everything else comes later. And I wouldn't be here if I hadn't paid it forward. Because I remember my first ever VC role was someone I worked with in college. And I said, how can I ever repay you? She said, the one thing I ask of you is to pay it forward, because she's like, hey, you're a great fit. She personally referred me to this role, and they just interviewed me, and they're like, got it, you got this role. And so that's really what I tell people is if you don't know how to help, you just pay it forward. And that's why I'm here today.
Love it. Well, let's wrap up with some rapid fire questions. What's one common mistake you see first time founders make when fundraising?
Yeah. Common mistake I would say is assuming that they can that a VC is just automatically going to, I would say, like, say yes without diving deeper. Like if they get the VC excited enough and the VC is like, oh, like I'll just immediately like commit after maybe a few meetings. Like I think just understanding that you need to keep the VC excited, keep following up, but just understand that it's not going to be like the reason I say this is because you see the things in the news where like it's like, I raised my round in 2 days. Here's how I did it. That is great for some founders, but that's not really the reality for most founders. So don't expect that if you don't do that, one, it's bad, and two, that like you have to do that or you fail.
Yeah. Which startup trend feels overhyped to you right now, and which one is underrated?
Yeah, I would say, let's see, overhyped right now. I think a startup trend that's overhyped right now is using AI for like GEO for search. We actually just talked about this because we've seen so many companies that are like, and like there are some companies that are doing really well, right? But there's so many that are like doing this. It's like really hard for that differentiation and what sets you apart. So that's what I'd say is overhyped. I think underhyped, or I don't know if that's the right word. I would say like we're really excited right now about the robotics space. So we're looking at like software for robotics, people who can use specific software to help program robots without having the technical background. Because right now, so many people are learning how to use AI at such a young age who may not be technical. And there's a lot of programs for vibe coding. So I think finding some solution that makes it really, really easy to learn how to program without actually knowing how to program, that's going to be a huge winner for sure.
If you could have dinner with any investor or founder, living or dead, who would it be and why?
Yeah, I thought about this. It'd be Lori from Shark Tank. Reason being, she knows how to tell people no, but in a nice way. That's a very important skill as a VC, because she, from my understanding, it doesn't seem like she's burned very many bridges, if at all. And everyone loves her and respects her, and she's seen as like the nice VC. So that's how I like to position myself.
Love it. What's a book, podcast, or framework that's recently changed how you think?
Yeah, so there's this founder that I follow and investor called, his name is Alex, the founder of acquisition.com. He recently made this post, actually it was earlier today, and I love this. So I'm just going to read it. It said, he said, people underestimate how much brute force you have to use to will your goals into existence. People work their whole lives for what they could get in a few years if they just went all in. Deleting work-life balance for a season gives you more work-life balance over a lifetime. You're not crazy for working hard. You're crazy for trying to get them to understand. What this means is I'd rather work really hard in my 20s, so that way I can have more time to relax when I'm older. Building that brand, building that career, because then it gives you more freedom later on. And that's what my fiance and I love. And it's that, like, it's hard to say work-life balance because it's something different for everybody, but the harder you work when you're young, it pays more dividends. It's kind of like why you should start literally investing at a young age.
Yeah, I love that. What's a lesson from judging hundreds of pitches that applies equally to life outside of startups and VC?
Yeah, I would say learning how to make really quick decisions and understanding going with your gut. And so I think this is an important life lesson because it's helping judge people's character. And I think it's an important lesson for like aspiring investors, as well as like when I think about one day whenever I have kids, it's like, what do I want to teach them? It's knowing what is your first impression of someone. And so I think when you're pitching, you really have to learn, how can you communicate something clearly? Can you get people to like you? And in the real world, when you're doing business or you're interacting with people, maybe regardless of profession, you really have to know how to convince people to trust you, right? Like, for example, let's think of a doctor. You're treating a patient and they're telling you their medical history. You have to get them to trust you. And so that's kind of the case when you're giving a pitch. You're pitching yourself and your trust and your credibility. And if a founder can do that well, let's say you've got like 1 minute to pitch who you are and what you're doing, and you can get that trust, that skill set can be very valuable in other areas of your life.
What's the hardest no you ever had to give, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, so hardest no I had to give, there was this founder that we were working with. It was a company where I personally resonated with what they were doing. And I'm speaking very broadly about this because I can't share too much, unfortunately. But essentially, it was something that was like near and dear to my heart. And I felt like I really resonated with it. Like I was the target market. It was harder for me to explain to the team because, they weren't as much the target market in terms of who the business was designed for. And ultimately passed for good reason because we knew this market really well. So it was like we had evaluated a company in a similar space previously. And so I think for me, it was hard because I built like such a good relationship with the founder. And I was like, it kind of goes back to like, I was so ready to invest and I wanted to invest my own money. But ultimately it was understanding that, when they pass, and this is what I loved, is it wasn't like, oh, we don't get the problem. It was, we've looked at the actual dynamics of the market. We understand the financials. It's not that we don't think this is a problem. It's we've done the actual we've done both the quantitative and the qualitative. And so that's why I like this, because it was so respectful, because sometimes you're working in certain companies that can be very sensitive. For example, not this company, but a different company was in the mental health space. And, I've had a lot of experiences with that, just people like in my family. And so it was like very sensitive in how you handle that when you're passing on a company that is, if you pass the wrong way, it can be hurtful, right? And so it's like knowing how to treat those situations with that care. And so I think that's what I love about our team is we know how to treat founders with respect, regardless of what they're building. And it's never a personal thing. And I think that's so important. And that's also what I tell founders is that's another mistake from founders is don't take it personally when a VC passes on your deal. It's never against you. Maybe rarely, but like
not after they meet you typically.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's just hey, like we see a lot of great companies, we can only pick one, right? That's that.
Yeah. Those are the hard no's, right? That's like 95% are pretty easy. And then it's like that last like 9.5% is like really, really hard.
My first ever rejection email I remember writing a few years ago. I just was like, how am I going to do this? And eventually you just get used to it, but it doesn't make it any easier. But that was hard.
Yeah.
You kind of have to like, I don't know the word. It's like you have to get your, it's like venture wheels. I think some investor told me that.
Yeah. Get your venture. I love that. Last question. If you weren't in venture, what would you be doing?
Yeah, so I'd be running a YouTube channel teaching people how to win at crane games, and I'd also be running my own arcade ever since I was 4 or 5 years old. Well, actually, I don't think YouTube existed when I was 4 or 5 years old. I have to do the math on that. But ever since, like as far as I can remember, I was watching YouTube videos and teaching myself how to win at crane games. I remember I watched somebody at H-E-B, which is this grocery store in Texas. They had like a crane game and I watched somebody win. They had a bag full of stuffed animals and I said, I'm going to be that person one day. And so now I can go to any arcade, pretty much decide if it's possible to win at a crane game. I know exactly how to win if someone can win. And I've won hundreds of stuff, actually probably more like thousands if I think about that. I've donated so many. And, I also have won designer purses from the arcade. I've won 12 designer purses by saving up points. So like I'm pretty much an expert at this. Like if I wasn't in venture, I would actually be doing this genuinely for a living. Maybe if I ever retire, which I couldn't retire because I love this, but yeah, I'd start my own arcade because I know the economics. I know the unit economics of all the arcade games because I've read all the manuals.
Amazing. Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation, learned a lot. I'm sure folks out there listening will really appreciate it as well. Thanks for coming on.
Of course. Thank you.